the whole congregation just fell on their faces on the carpet, right in their pews. There was no invitation given. It was a response, and there was this groaning that came out of the whole congregation. I can remember that to this day.
And I would just go to my office and I'd lie under my desk and I'd just begin to cry out, "Lord, touch me again or I'm going to die. Touch me again or I'm going to die."
I mean, there wasn't anything in that revival that we could point at and say we did that, because it was, even the prayers were ordained of God, and we just flowed in the river.
You know, there were times before, you know, when I felt like I had to do things, you know, make things happen. But when the revival hit us, I didn't have to make things happen; they just happened.
Hi everyone. Some of you may or may not know that I was raised in a revival. Now, if you have a passion for God, if you have a passion and a hunger and a burning desire for revival, or if you don't, but you want one, stay tuned. We have an amazing interview with some very, very special guests to me. To my right, I have my dad, John Baker, and my grandfather, John Barrow. I call him Papa. And they have been in ministry for since Moses.
Elijah.
Okay, since Elijah. So, Papa, how long have you been in ministry professionally, vocationally?
Vocationally, I would say since 1965. I think I had my first pastorate when I was in Bible college. Did an outstation, so you can do the math from there.
Okay.
You know, something like 50 years, I guess.
Yeah. So, Dad, how long have you been a minister?
Well, vocationally, 26 years altogether.
Okay.
So I worked with...
Now, what's vocationally?
Well, you got paid for doing it.
Well, you know, sometimes
you don't get
paid.
That's
true.
I know about that. I know about that. So, so you've been, you both have been in ministry and in church leadership for quite some time, and you both had the distinct privilege of pastoring in revival. Now, when I was about 7 years old, a revival hit our church. I remember thinking when I was young, I never want to go back. I remember church before, and it was boring. And I remember when the revival hit church, we were in church every single night for quite a while. About 6 weeks straight, just about. We took Mondays off, and God moved, and I never resented being in church because I knew every time we'd go, God was going to show up, and it was going to be exciting.
It was every night, and it was late nights.
Yeah.
And so during that time, your mom and I decided that it was probably best to homeschool you and your sisters. So
that's why I can't do math.
Well, you were always on the dean's list at college. You did all right.
So I want to talk a little bit about the revival and about the glory of God. But before we get to how it started, could you just share, each of you take a turn and share just a crazy story, some amazing testimony. There were several that God did during that revival. You just want to share the story that comes to mind. You want to go, Papa?
Well, I remember that we were having a tent meeting. I think that was still part of the revival.
Yeah.
And there was this young lady that came. This was one of the outstanding miracles that took place.
Sure. Yeah.
She was not a rank unbeliever. She just came in. I don't know how she came in, who brought her in, but she came in. And as we were worshiping, the music was wonderful. We had some good, solid worship leaders. And this young lady came in. She would, people would get up and we created an area for them to dance, because we realized that we had to take out chairs in the front of the church so that people would have opportunity to come up and demonstrate before the Lord.
Right there in the altar area.
Yeah.
So people were pretty accustomed to, as soon as the music would start, they would run forward.
Ran right up to the front. Yep. And then they would begin to worship. Well, this girl, she was from California. And from my understanding, we realize now she was a drug addict. And she came in, she was a rank unbeliever, and she got caught up in the music and the worship and the power of God that was being manifest there. And the next thing you know, as she was worshiping, dancing. I guess she was worshiping. I don't know.
Yeah, she was jumping up and down like all the other kids.
Right.
But
trying not to look out of place.
The next thing we know, she fell down on a heap on the floor, and afterwards she testified. Somebody asked her, I think, what happened? What had happened to her? And she said, look at my arms. She said, when I came in here, there were needle marks all up and down my arm. There's no needle marks there anymore.
Wow.
So
and
cool.
God moved it. God, I mean, God really manifested himself to her. So I think that was one of the outstanding things, that there were so many. In fact, I have forgotten more than I know anymore about what happened.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things. I don't know. John might have some other.
Well,
things.
I remember one time. It was not necessarily one of the services, but it was during that time. I was in the church office, and I was just spending time in the presence of the Lord, and just worshiping, getting myself prepared. I think it was a Saturday afternoon, and you went to the hospital. Remember that? And so you were in the ICU, and Beth and your mom called and said that Papa was in the hospital, and so I left. And when I came into the hospital room, Dr. Mark was there with you, wasn't he?
Yeah, me and Dr. Trugowski, and he's a praying doctor.
Yeah.
And
so I walked in, and I just knew Jesus was walking in with me. I just was just carrying the presence of the Lord, and I said, all right, we're going to pray, and he's going to get better. So, let's pray, Dr. Mark. And so he prayed, and the Lord healed you.
He was right there. Yeah, the Lord healed me. I mean, that was a notable miracle too. And I've had heart issues since I was 56. I had a minor heart attack I didn't know that I'd had. And I'd been dealing with AFib and high and low blood pressures, and God just helped me in a big way during that time. That was a wonderful experience that I had.
Yeah, there were other miracles, but the thing that marked that season of revival, I think, was just such a manifest presence of God, and the way that people responded to that manifest presence of God.
People would just come in and they would want to worship the Lord. I mean, they were ready for worship. It was an amazing thing to see it spread itself among see how that God manifested Himself amongst the congregation. It was, we would stand up there. I didn't have much to do with it. We would just do the worship stuff, and then God would move, and then we would try to follow after what He was trying to, what was going on a lot of the times.
I remember there were some precious, wonderful things, and then of course there were some things that it kind of made me laugh when I thought about them later. I remember one man who was just a precious, precious brother, and he and I would pray for people together. One of your board members, and Bob, and
Bob, oh yeah, okay. You mentioned his name.
Yeah, I'm with Bob Schultz. I hope you're watching this, Bob. And he's such a precious guy. And so we would be praying together. And he would begin to respond to the weighty presence of the Lord by, I don't understand it. It didn't happen to me. But he could not move. I would be praying for people, and then I would look over my shoulder. Where's Bob? Where's Bob? And he was several people away from me, several feet, and he was glued to the floor and completely unable to move because of the weight of God's glory.
That happened to Mariah Woodworth-Etter
Yeah.
in her meetings. Sometimes she'd be frozen, sometimes for days,
Yeah.
just stuck in the same place as the glory of the Lord would fall on her.
Wow. And there were times when the Spirit of the Lord would fall on you.
I remember.
And I remember praying for you, and one time the Lord came on you, and you fell out and laid on the floor for quite some time. Do you remember that experience?
Yeah, I do.
Well, you can tell it from your perspective.
Yeah, well, I remember the first time I ever fell out. It was somebody came and laid a hand on me and prayed for me, and I could have swore he pushed me over, and I was just fighting that. And I my eyes were closed, and I'm like, not only did he push me over, but he's holding me down on the floor. And I finally opened my eyes, and I don't know how long I had been down, but I felt that I was being pinned to the floor, and there was no one. There was no one touching me. There was no one around me. I remember sensing the glory and the weighty glory of the Lord in such a profound way, even as a young kid. And it's to this day marked my life. I have times in prayer where I just begin to cry out to the Lord. I remember as I was doing my internship with the campus ministry, and I would just go to my office and I'd lie under my desk and I'd just begin to cry out, Lord, touch me again or I'm going to die. Touch me again or I'm going to die. As I began to remember just the precious, when you encounter God's glory like that, there's just nothing that can compare to it. You never want to go back. You never want to live without that, because I've had those moments where you just feel so close to heaven, and then it begins to lift, and I remember feeling heartsick and heartbroken, and feel like, God, that's where I'm supposed to be.
That's right.
That's home. I began to feel homesick for God's glory and in His presence, and so we're going to talk about that some more. But I want to ask Dad. I want to ask you, what was it like leading up to the revival? What were some of the first signs of revival that you began to see?
Well, God was doing something in the 90s. It was everywhere. There was Toronto and Pensacola, but I was oblivious to it all. I knew something was happening in Toronto, but it didn't connect with me at all.
The internet wasn't a big thing up in northern Michigan at that time.
All we had was videotape.
Yeah.
Video, VHS and dial-up. So we had to connect with the world. But we... 8-track tapes. Well, we had cassettes by that point. But we had an evangelist come to the church. I think it was Dominic Galati, if I'm not mistaken. And he came for a week of services, Sunday to Sunday, as I remember it. The services weren't well attended, and they just seemed to be hard. But one of the things he wanted to have happen, and he really insisted, that we gather for prayer every morning at 9 o'clock and pray for an hour. And to be honest, that first day, that hour went slow. I prayed for everything I knew how to pray about, and I looked at my watch and I thought, surely an hour's passed, and it was like 5 minutes. I don't know if anyone's ever been in that place before, but I prayed. It was hard, but God really began, over the course of that week, He began to lead us into a deeper place with Him. When the week of revival meetings was over, we decided as a church, the people who had come for those prayer meetings, and they began to be well attended. they said, can we just continue on praying like this? So I think initially the plan was we would do that on Mondays. And then we prayed that first Monday, and then we said, can we do this again? And so the plan was made. Well, let's pray on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And then it went to every day. And we were praying, and it wasn't just an hour. It was praying from 9 until about noon, I think, about every day. And we were just crying out to the Lord. I don't even know what it was I was praying for. I know that God had put something in my heart, and I would spend that time with my face in the carpet, and I would just wet the carpet in tears. And
the Spirit of God would come in there and move,
Yeah.
just sit there and worship and bask in the presence of God in those times.
That was just deep. Something deep in me was just moaning and crying out to the Lord. And
we would pray for people and things like that, but then after that, you would just go into a spirit of worship and praise and adoration and things like that, or groanings, like Paul talks about.
Mm-hmm.
so we prayed like that it's about late May, June, I think, when we started praying, and we prayed, and then it wasn't until like September or October that we'd found anything about what was happening in Brownsville, and then when we saw the testimonies,
we're oblivious of all that.
Yeah,
really.
I think our friends.
I don't know about you, but
Oh no, I didn't know anything about that. I think our friends. David and Brenda Anderson, they were pastoring in Indiana at the time. I think your mom and Nana went to do a ladies' meeting for them, and they said, "Hey, have you seen these tapes?" And they put a couple tapes. They were at the Andersons down in Dave and Brenda, and so they put these tapes in their hands, these videotapes of the testimonies, the Ward sisters, and there was one at Honey, Where Are We From?
Yeah.
You ever see that one on YouTube?
Yeah, I'll put the link to that in the descrition of this video.
It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
It's awesome.
But when we saw that I immediately said, that's what we're praying for.
Mm-hmm.
And we showed that in church on a Wednesday night, I think, or maybe it was a Sunday night. I know it was an evening service. And I remember the effect of that was that the whole congregation just fell on their faces on the carpet, right in their pews. There was no invitation given. It was a response, and there was this groaning that came out of the whole congregation. I can remember that to this day.